Every crime scene had the same mystery: a dead victim, an empty road, and a tow truck driver who always arrived first. The police thought Ethan Cole was the man cleaning up the damage. They never considered he was the reason it happened. Blackwater Ridge, Pennsylvania, was the kind of town where people locked their doors before sunset and avoided the highways after midnight. Not because the roads were dangerous, because something about those roads felt wrong. For 12 years, the city had been haunted by a series of hit-and-run accidents. Different victims, different locations. No connection. A college student walking home, a mechanic changing a tire, a man waiting beside a broken-down car. The cases sat inside police files with one common phrase written again and again: no suspect identified. But there was one name that appeared near almost every accident: Ethan Cole. At 43 years old, Ethan was the driver everyone trusted. He worked the night shift for Blackwater Recovery Services, helping stranded drivers when most people were asleep. His co-workers described him as quiet but kind. The type of man who stopped to help someone push a broken car. The type of man nobody feared. That was why Detective Rachel Hayes never paid attention to him. Not until the Daniel Mercer case. At 2:13 a.m., Ethan received a recovery call on Route 47. A vehicle abandoned on the side of the highway. Possible mechanical failure. Simple job. But when Ethan arrived, he found something different. The car was still running. The driver's door was open, and the owner was missing. Ethan stepped out of his truck and looked around. Rain covered the road. The forest beside him was silent. "Hello?" he called. No answer. Then his flashlight moved across the wet ground. A wallet. Inside was a driver's license. Daniel Mercer, 24 years old. Beefo. Where Ethan could make another move. Police sirens appeared in the distance. A state trooper walked toward him. "You Ethan Cole?" "Yes." The officer looked past him toward the highway. "You found the vehicle?" Ethan nodded. The officer hesitated. "Then you might want to step back." "Why?" The trooper looked toward the trees. "Because we found the driver." Ethan followed his eyes. A body covered by a white sheet. For a few seconds, Ethan didn't move. Then he quietly asked, "Did he see who hit him?" The trooper frowned. "What?" Ethan looked confused, as if he didn't understand why he said it. "I mean, did anyone see the driver?" A few minutes later, Detective Rachel Hayes arrived. She studied the scene carefully. The broken car, the tire marks, the victim. Then she noticed Ethan standing alone beside his tow truck. Most people at a crime scene looked at the victim. Ethan kept looking at the road. Rachel walked toward him. "Mr. Cole?" Ethan turned. "Yes?" "How long were you here before police arrived?" "Maybe 5 minutes." "And you didn't see anyone?" "No." Rachel looked at the highway behind him. "Strange." "What is?" She looked back at Ethan. "People usually remember the thing they see." Ethan said nothing. A cold wind moved through the trees. For a brief moment, Ethan looked toward his truck. The driver's side window reflected the darkness behind him, and in that reflection, he saw a small figure sitting in the back seat. Ethan turned around. The truck was empty. "Mr. Cole?" Rachel's voice pulled him back. Ethan looked at her. "Everything okay?" He forced a small smile. "Yeah." But when he climbed into his truck and drove away from the scene, his eyes kept moving toward the rearview mirror. Because this time, he wasn't afraid of seeing someone behind him. He was afraid of seeing someone who had been waiting. Gee, there all along. He was afraid of seeing someone who had been waiting there all along. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror as the highway disappeared behind him. Nothing, only darkness. He almost laughed at himself. A grown man, driving alone at night, scared of an empty back seat. But Ethan knew something was wrong, because he had felt this before. 14 years ago, The night he lost Noah. Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter and focused on the road ahead. He did not like remembering that night, not because it was painful, because some parts of it no longer made sense. He remembered the crash, the sound of broken glass, Claire screaming, the flashing lights. But there was always one thing his mind returned to: a man standing near the road, a stranger wearing a dark jacket. The person Ethan believed had destroyed his family. A few miles later, the radio suddenly changed. Static filled the truck. Ethan reached toward the button. Then a small voice came from behind him. "Dad." His hand stopped. His breathing changed. Slowly, he looked at the mirror. A boy was sitting in the back seat. 8 years old. Blue jacket. Wet hair. Noah. Ethan's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "No." The boy looked at him calmly. "You saw him again." Ethan looked back at the road. "Not now." Noah tilted his head. "You know where he is?" Ethan swallowed. Ahead, under the highway lights, a man stood beside a broken bicycle. Dark jacket, same shape, same posture, the same person Ethan had seen for 14 years. His heart started beating faster. "Noah." The boy watched the man. "Is that him?" Ethan slowed down. For a moment, he knew the answer should be no. He knew something was wrong, but the memory was stronger than logic. The road became the intersection from 14 years ago. The rain became heavier. The stranger became the person who took his son away. Ethan's foot moved toward the accelerator. Then his phone rang. The sudden sound broke the moment. Ethan blinked. The road was normal again. The man beside the bicycle was gone. The back seat was empty. He pulled over, breathing heavily. The phone screen showed an unknown number. Ethan answered. A woman's voice came through. "Mr. Cole?" "Yes?" "This is Blackwater Ridge Police Department." Ethan looked at the empty passenger seat. "We need to ask you some questions about tonight's accident." Ethan stayed silent. Then the officer added, "Because we found something unusual near Daniel Mercer's vehicle." "What?" A pause. Then, "We found your truck's tire marks leading away from the scene." Ethan looked down at his hands. They were shaking. And for the first time in years, he wondered if the accidents he remembered were not the ones that happened to him. Maybe they were the ones he caused. Maybe they were the ones he caused. The thought stayed with Ethan long after the call ended. He sat inside his truck on the side of the highway, staring at his hands resting on the steering wheel. Hands that had pulled strangers from broken vehicles. Hands that had fixed engines. Hands that had held Noah for the last time. He looked toward the back seat. Empty, but the silence felt heavier than before. The next sound that reached him was not Noah's voice. It was his phone ringing again. This time it was his supervisor. "Ethan, where are you?" "On Route 47? A pause. "You need to come back to the yard." "Why?" His supervisor lowered his voice. "Because Detective Hayes is there." Ethan said nothing. 20 minutes later, Blackwater Recovery Services sat under bright security lights. The place smelled like oil, metal, and old rain. Tow trucks lined the parking area like silent machines waiting for another disaster. Rachel Hayes stood beside Ethan's truck. She held a folder in her hand. "You came back quickly." Ethan looked at her. "You asked me to." Rachel glanced at the truck. "Do you always follow instructions that easily?" "I don't know what that means." "It means you are either the most cooperative person I've ever met," she opened the folder, "or you are very good at pretending." Ethan's expression changed slightly. "What is this about?" Rachel removed a photograph. A close-up image of tire marks. "Daniel Mercer's accident." Ethan looked at it. "The tire pattern from the scene matches your truck." Ethan shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." "No? I arrived after the accident." Rachel watched him carefully. "That is what everyone says about you." Ethan looked up. "What?" Rachel placed several reports on the hood of the truck. Different dates, different victims, different locations. But one name appeared repeatedly: Blackwater Recovery Services. Ethan stared at the papers. I was doing my job. I know. Rachel's answer surprised him. She closed the folder. That is the problem. A cold silence passed between them. You are always doing your job, Ethan. He looked away. Rachel stepped closer. How many accident scenes have you been to? I don't know. Try. Ethan thought for a moment. Hundreds. And how many do you remember? The question bothered him, because the answer came too quickly. Not all of them. Rachel noticed his hesitation. Why? Ethan looked toward the dark parking lot. I work nights. That isn't an answer. No. His voice became quieter. It isn't. Rachel studied him. For the first time, she didn't see a suspect. She saw a man searching his own memories. A man afraid of what he might find. Before she could ask another question, Ethan's phone buzzed. A new recovery request. He looked at the screen, then froze. The location was only 3 miles away. A place he knew. A place connected to another unsolved accident. Rachel noticed his face. What is it? Ethan slowly lowered the phone and whispered, I've been there before. I've been there before. Ethan's voice was barely above a whisper. Rachel watched his face carefully. The confidence he had shown minutes ago was gone. What happened there? Ethan looked at the address on his phone. A closed gas station near the Eastern Highway. A place abandoned after a fire years ago. I don't know. Rachel frowned. You just said you've been there before. Ethan looked at her. I know. Then tell me why. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because the strange part was not that he remembered the place. The strange part was that he remembered something that never happened. A child standing under a broken streetlight. A voice calling his name. A pair of headlights coming toward him. Rachel followed Ethan's eyes. What are you seeing? Ethan quickly looked away. Nothing. That answer usually means something. They drove to the location together, Ethan in his tow truck. Rachel following behind. The road became darker as they moved away from the city. Trees surrounded both sides of the highway. The kind of place where a person could disappear and nobody would know. When they arrived, Ethan parked near the old gas station. The building was covered in graffiti. The windows were shattered. The old fuel pumps stood like forgotten statues. Rachel stepped out. This place was connected to a case from 3 years ago. Ethan looked at her. What case? A woman named Laura Whitman. His face changed. Rachel noticed immediately. You know that name? Ethan looked confused. No, but his voice sounded uncertain. Rachel walked closer. Laura was found 200 feet from this station. Ethan stared at the ground. The rain began falling again, slowly, like the night was repeating itself. Then Ethan heard something, a familiar sound, a child's voice. Dad. He froze. Rachel saw it, the way his entity. Our body became still. Ethan? He didn't answer. His eyes moved toward the passenger window of his truck. The reflection showed the inside of the vehicle. Empty seats. Except for one thing. A small blue jacket. Sitting in the back. Ethan stepped closer. No. Rachel moved beside him. What? He touched the window. His hand trembled. I know this jacket. Rachel looked at the empty truck. There is nothing there. Ethan turned toward her. For a second, fear replaced confusion. That's the problem. Before Rachel could respond, her phone rang. A hospital notification. She answered. Detective Hayes. A nurse spoke quickly. There has been an update on Maya Bennett. Rachel's expression changed. What happened? She woke up. A pause. And she keeps asking for the same person. Rachel looked at Ethan. Who? The nurse hesitated. The driver who hit her. Rachel tightened her grip on the phone. What did she say? The nurse lowered her voice. She said she remembers his face. Rachel looked at Ethan standing beside the old tow truck. Then the nurse continued. But she also said something else. What? She said... The nurse took a breath. He wasn't looking at the road. Rachel stared at Ethan. Then what was he looking at? The answer came quietly through the phone. The boy sitting behind him. The boy sitting behind him. Rachel heard the words again in her head long after the call ended. She looked at Ethan. He was still standing beside the tow truck, staring into the empty back seat. Not like a person looking at an empty vehicle, like a person looking at something everyone else couldn't see. Who is Noah? Rachel asked. Ethan's expression changed instantly. The name had not come from her. It had come from somewhere else. His silence was the answer. Rachel stepped closer. Ethan. He looked at her. My son. The rain became heavier. What happened to him? Ethan looked away. 14 years ago? His voice became quieter. Car accident. Rachel waited. She knew there were details people avoided, and those details were usually where the truth lived. He was 8. A long pause. His name was Noah. For the first time, Rachel saw something different in Ethan. Not fear. Pain. The kind that had been buried for years. He was sitting in the back seat, Ethan said. Rachel noticed his hands shaking. I was driving. What happened? Ethan looked toward the road. I don't remember everything. That answer bothered Rachel. Everyone remembers the accident that changes their life. Ethan looked at her. I remember enough. The next morning, Rachel sat inside her office surrounded by old case files. The walls were covered with photographs, reports, and evidence from years of investigations. She opened Noah Cole's accident file. The official report was short. Single vehicle collision. Driver survived. Child deceased. No criminal charges. But something caught her attention. The report mentioned Ethan had suffered a traumatic brain injury. Memory gaps. Confusion. Episodes of disorientation. Rachel leaned back. The pieces were starting to connect. She opened the Daniel Mercer case. Then Laura Whitman's. Then the others. Every victim. Every accident. Every scene where Ethan appeared. She placed the files side by side. The pattern was no longer invisible. It was impossible to ignore. Ethan was not just near these accidents. He was connected to every one of them. But Rachel found something that confused her. A murderer hides evidence. Ethan collected it. Inside his company locker, she found copies of accident reports, newspaper articles, photos. Every victim, every location, every detail. He had spent years following the cases. Why? Rachel searched deeper. Then she found a handwritten notebook hidden beneath the files. The pages were filled with the same sentence written hundreds of times. Different handwriting, different pressure, same words. Find him. Rachel turned the page. Another sentence. This one was written much darker. I know he is still out there. Rachel stared at the notebook. For years, Ethan had been searching for someone. Someone he believed killed his son. Someone who never existed. Her phone rang. It was the hospital. Maya Bennett was awake again. Rachel arrived within minutes. Maya looked weaker than before, but her eyes were clear. Rachel sat beside her. Maya, I need you to tell me everything you remember. Maya looked frightened. I don't remember his face. Whose? The driver. Rachel leaned closer. But you remember something. Maya nodded slowly. He kept looking in the mirror. Rachel felt a chill. What mirror? Maya's voice dropped. The rear-view mirror. A pause. He wasn't watching me. Rachel waited. Maya looked toward the hospital window. He was watching the boy.
Before we begin, remember this. The story you are about to hear is fictional. The characters, locations, and events have been created for a psychological thriller. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental. But the fear behind this story comes from something very real. On June 11th, 2023, a tanker truck crash on Interstate 95 in Philadelphia caused a devastating highway collapse. The accident shut down one of America's busiest roads and reminded millions that behind every crash scene, there is more than damaged metal and flashing lights. There are drivers, there are victims, there are families waiting for answers. Real highways carry real dangers every night. But sometimes, the most frightening stories are born from the questions those accidents leave behind. Questions with no easy answers. Questions that make us wonder. What if the person who arrives after every accident is not there to help? What if he is the reason it happened? Tonight, we enter the fictional town of Blackwater Ridge, Pennsylvania. A town where police discovered a disturbing pattern. A dead victim, an empty road, and a tow truck driver who always arrived first. They thought Ethan Cole was there to clean up the damage. They never imagined he was the reason it happened. Now let's begin the story.
He was watching the boy. Rachel couldn't forget Maya's words. Not because they sounded impossible, because Ethan had said almost the same thing without knowing Maya existed. The next evening, Rachel returned to Blackwater Recovery Services. She didn't go there as a detective. She went there as someone trying to understand a man who might not understand himself. Ethan was sitting alone in the garage, repairing an old radio. The building was quiet. Only the sound of metal tools and distant rain filled the room. "You fix those often?" Rachel asked. Ethan looked up. "Old radios?" "Yes. They're easier than people." Rachel looked at the broken device in his hands. "How?" Ethan smiled slightly. "When they stop working, you can find the damaged part." Rachel noticed the sadness behind the answer. "And people?" Ethan placed the screwdriver down. "Sometimes they stop working and nobody knows why." Rachel opened a folder. Inside were photographs from the accident scenes. "I need to ask you something." Ethan looked at the pictures. "About Noah?" "No." She paused. "About the others?" His expression changed. "What others?" "The people who died on these roads." Silence. Rachel placed the photos on the table. Ethan looked at each one. Daniel Mercer. Laura Whitman. Others. His face became pale. "I don't understand." "I know." Rachel sat across from him. "That is what worries me." Ethan looked at her. "You think I did this?" Rachel didn't answer immediately, because she wasn't sure. "I think something happens to you when you drive." Ethan looked away. "No." "Then tell me why you lose time." His eyes moved back to her. "I don't." "You do." Rachel placed a report on the table. 3 hours missing after Daniel Mercer's accident. Another report. 40 minutes missing after Laura Whitman's death. Another. 27 minutes. Utes after Maya Bennett was hit. Ethan stared at the papers. His breathing became heavier. "I was there?" Rachel watched him carefully. "You tell me." Ethan stood suddenly. "No." His voice cracked. "I help people." "I know. I help people." Rachel didn't move. "Then why do you keep asking the same question?" Ethan froze. "What question?" Rachel looked directly at him. "Did they see the driver?" The room went silent. Ethan slowly stepped back, because he didn't remember saying it. But somewhere deep inside, he knew she was telling the truth. That night, Ethan drove home earlier than usual. He needed answers. Not from Rachel. Not from the police. From the one person who had known him before everything changed. His ex-wife, Claire. But when he reached her house, he stopped outside the gate because the lights were already on, and someone was standing behind the window, a small figure, wearing a blue jacket. A small figure, wearing a blue jacket. Ethan stopped breathing. For a moment, the world around him disappeared. The street, the rain, the sound of passing cars, everything faded. Because standing behind Claire's window was the same child Ethan had seen in the rearview mirror. Noah. "Impossible," Ethan whispered. His hand tightened around the steering wheel. Then the figure moved. Gone. Ethan stepped out of the truck and walked toward the house. Every step felt heavier than the last. He knocked. A few seconds later, the door opened. Claire Cole stood there. 14 years had changed her. Her hair was shorter. Her face carried the exhaustion of someone who had spent years carrying a secret. But her eyes were the same. They looked at Ethan like they had been waiting for this moment. "Why are you here?" Ethan looked past her into the house. "Did you see him?" Claire's expression changed. "Who?" Ethan hesitated. "Noah." The silence that followed was worse than any answer. Claire slowly stepped back. "Come inside." The house was quiet, too quiet. Ethan sat in the living room where old photographs still covered the shelves. A younger Ethan, a younger Claire, a smiling Noah. A family that existed before one moment destroyed everything. Claire placed 2 cups of coffee on the table. "You finally saw him again." Ethan looked up. "You knew?" Claire looked at the photograph of Noah. "I knew you would." Ethan's voice became sharper. "What does that mean?" Claire sat down. "It means I spent 14 years waiting for you to remember." Ethan stared at her. "Remember what?" Claire looked directly at him. "The truth." The word felt heavier than it should have. Ethan shook his head. "I know what happened." "No." Claire's voice was calm. "You know what your mind allowed you to remember." Ethan looked away. "The man in the row," he said. Claire closed her eyes. "There was no man, Ethan." His face changed. "No. There was nobody standing there. No. You were looking back." The room became silent. Ethan's hands started shaking. Claire continued. "You and Noah were arguing. I was just telling him to stop. You turned around." Ethan looked at her. Only for a second. Claire nodded. That second was enough. The memories came back like broken pieces. A red light. A horn. Headlights. Noah's voice. A crash. Ethan covered his face. "No." Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Your brain created someone else because you couldn't live with the truth." Ethan looked at her. "Then why did I see him?" Claire had no answer, and that scared her. Before Ethan could speak, his phone rang. "Rachel." He answered. "Ethan, where are you?" He looked at Claire. "At my old house." Rachel's voice became serious. "I need you to listen carefully." A pause. Maya remembered something new. Ethan stood. "What?" Rachel lowered her voice. She remembered the license plate. Ethan froze. "What plate?" A long silence. Then Rachel said, "Your tow truck." "Your tow truck." Ethan felt the room become smaller. The walls, the photographs, the memories. Everything around him seemed to move farther away. Claire watched his face change. She already knew. The truth he had spent 14 years running from had finally caught him. "Ethan?" Rachel's voice came through the phone. "Are you still there?" He couldn't answer. His eyes moved toward the old family photograph on the shelf. Noah was smiling, 8 years old, before everything changed. "I need you to come to the station," Rachel said. Ethan slowly lowered the phone. "I understand." But he didn't move. Because something inside him had finally broken. Not suddenly, not loudly. It had been cracking for years. Every accident, every victim, every night drive, every question he asked strangers, all leading back to the same person, himself. 3 hours later, Ethan sat alone in his truck outside Blackwater Recovery. He hadn't gone to the police station, not yet. He needed one thing, a final answer. His phone received a new dispatch notification. A stranded vehicle. Location, Old Mill Road. Ethan stared at the screen. He knew he should ignore it. He knew he should call Rachel. but his hand moved before his mind could stop it. He started the engine. The road ahead disappeared into heavy rain. Old Mill Road was one of the most isolated areas outside Blackwater Ridge. No houses, no streetlights, only trees and endless darkness. When Ethan arrived, he saw the vehicle, a family SUV, hazard lights flashing, a man standing beside it, a woman holding an umbrella, and a little boy sitting inside. Ethan stopped the truck. His heart started racing. The boy looked about 8 years old, exactly Noah's age. Then the rearview mirror changed. Ethan froze. Noah was sitting behind him, but this time, Noah was not looking at the road. He was looking at Ethan. "Dad." Ethan closed his eyes. "Please." Noah spoke softly. "You found him." Ethan opened his eyes. Ahead of him, the stranded father stepped forward. For 1 second, Ethan saw the dark jacket, the stranger, the person who had haunted him for 14 years. His foot moved toward the accelerator. Then the boy inside the SUV looked toward Ethan, not with fear, with confusion. Just a child, not a monster, not an enemy, just a child. Ethan's foot stopped. The image in front of him changed. The dark jacket disappeared. The stranger disappeared. And standing on the road was Ethan himself, 14 years younger, turning around in the driver's seat, looking away from the road. Ethan gasped. "No." The memory hit him completely. The truth. The real truth. There was no stranger. There was no killer. There was only one mistake. 1 second. One turn of the head. A sound came from behind him. "Dad." This time Noah's voice was different. Not accusing. Not angry. Just sad. Ethan looked into the mirror. Noah was gone. For the first time in 14 years, the back seat was empty. Then headlights appeared behind him. A police vehicle. Rachel stepped out into the rain. She walked toward Ethan's truck. Ethan opened the door before she reached him. His face was pale. His voice barely worked. "I remember." Rachel stopped. "Remember what?" Ethan looked back at the empty seat, then at the road, and whispered, "Everything." Everything! The word disappeared into the sound of the rain. Rachel stood beside the truck door, watching Ethan carefully. She had spent weeks trying to understand him. A suspect. A witness. A victim. But standing there in the middle of that empty road, Ethan looked like someone who had finally stopped running from himself. "Tell me what happened," Rachel said. Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "The night Noah died." His voice broke. "I was angry." Rachel stayed silent. "I wasn't looking at the road." The rain ran down Ethan's face. "I turned around because he wouldn't stop kicking my seat." He closed his eyes. "Claire told me to watch the road." A painful pause. "I told her I knew what I was doing." Rachel looked down, because she already knew the next part. The truth that had been hidden under 14 years of confusion. The light changed. Ethan swallowed. And I didn't see it. For a moment, there was only rain. No excuses, no missing memories, no imaginary stranger, only the truth. I spent years looking for someone who wasn't there. Ethan looked toward his truck. I created a person to blame. Rachel asked quietly, "The people you hit?" Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with regret. "I thought they were him." The confession was not dramatic. There was no anger, no attempt to defend himself. That was what made it worse. Because Ethan finally understood every face he had taken away, every family he had destroyed, every road where someone waited for help that never came. The trial became one of the most talked about cases in Pennsylvania history. The newspapers gave him a name, the Blackwater Ridge Killer. People wanted a simple explanation, a monster, a motive, a reason. But the truth was harder to accept. Ethan Cole was not a man who planned murders. He was A man whose broken mind turned guilt into a weapon. The court heard from detectives, doctors, survivors, families of victims. Maya Bennett testified. Her memory was still damaged, but she remembered enough. She remembered the headlights, the truck, and the boy in the back seat. Ethan listened quietly from across the courtroom. When Maya finished speaking, she looked at him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Ethan lowered his head. Not because he wanted forgiveness, because he knew he didn't deserve it. Months later, Ethan sat inside a secure psychiatric facility. No steering wheel, no highways, no midnight roads. The doctors believed his episodes had stopped. The hallucinations were gone, or at least they thought they were. Detective Rachel Hayes visited him one final time. Ethan looked different, older, tired, but calmer. Rachel sat across from him. "How are you?" Ethan gave a small smile. "That's a strange question for someone like me." Rachel looked at the file in her hands. "You haven't seen Noah?" Ethan became quiet, then shook his head. "No." Rachel studied him. "Not even once?" "No." She relaxed slightly. After everything, maybe Ethan had finally escaped the thing haunting him. Rachel stood to leave, but before she reached the door, Ethan spoke. "Detective?" She turned. "Yes?" Ethan looked toward the window, at his reflection in the glass. "I was wrong about one thing." Rachel waited. "What?" Ethan slowly looked back at her. "I always thought Noah was sitting behind me because he wanted me to find the person responsible." A pause. "But I was wrong." Rachel felt something cold move through her. What was he doing then? Ethan looked again at the reflection and quietly answered. "He was making sure I didn't forget." He was making sure I didn't forget. Rachel left the facility without asking another question. Not because she had no questions, because some answers were more frightening than the mystery itself. For months, the Blackwater Ridge case slowly disappeared from the headlines. The newspapers moved on. The city tried to forget. The empty highways became ordinary roads again. But Ethan Cole remained inside the psychiatric facility, living with every memory he had spent 14 years trying to escape. The doctors monitored him closely. No driving, no night shifts, no access to vehicles, no triggers. Every session showed improvement. Ethan no longer talked about the man in the dark jacket. He no longer looked into mirrors searching for Noah. The doctors believed the hallucinations had finally stopped. But Rachel Hayes was not completely convinced, because she remembered something Ethan had said. Not about the accidents, not about the victims, about Noah. He was making sure I didn't forget. 6 months later, Rachel returned for one final visit. Ethan was sitting beside the window in the common room. A book rested in his hands. The same quiet man everyone had known before. Except now, there was no confusion in his eyes. Only acceptance. Rachel sat across from him. "You look better." Ethan closed the book. "I feel different. Do you still see him?" Ethan knew exactly who she meant. He looked toward the window. Outside, the facility parking lot was covered in morning fog. "No." Rachel watched him carefully. "Never." Ethan shook his head. "Not the way I used to." Something about that answer bothered her. "What does that mean?" Ethan stayed silent for a moment. Then he smiled faintly. "I spent years looking behind me." Rachel frowned. "Behind you?" "The rearview mirror." His fingers moved across the edge of the book. "I thought Noah was there because he wanted me to find someone. And now?" Ethan looked directly at her. "Now I know he wasn't looking for someone else." A cold feeling moved through Rachel. Then who was he looking at? Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward the window. The glass reflected the room behind them. A nurse walking past. A table. Empty chairs. Rachel followed his eyes. Nothing unusual. Then Ethan whispered, "He was watching me." The room became silent. Rachel looked back at Ethan. Ethan, he interrupted softly. "There is something I never told anyone. Her expression changed. What? Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the reflection. After every accident, he paused. I thought I lost time. Rachel leaned forward. But? Ethan looked at her. But sometimes I didn't lose time. A few seconds passed. I remembered. Rachel felt her heartbeat change. Then why didn't you say anything? Ethan looked down. Because I wasn't alone. The lights above them flickered. Only once. Rachel turned toward the window. For a brief second, she saw a small reflection beside Ethan. A child. Blue jacket. 8 years old. Then it was gone. Rachel looked back. Ethan was staring at her. You saw him. It wasn't a question. Rachel didn't answer, because she didn't know if she had, or if the story Ethan carried for 14 years had finally entered her own mind. She stood up slowly. The door opened behind her. Before leaving, she looked back one last time. Ethan was alone. At least, he appeared to be, and his eyes moved toward the empty chair beside him, and he quietly said, I know. Rachel stopped. Know what? Ethan smiled sadly. Why he stayed. The door closed. The security lock clicked. Inside the room, Ethan continued looking at the empty chair, and for the first time in 6 months, a small voice whispered, Dad. Ethan did not look behind him. He looked forward, because the voice was no longer coming from the back seat. It was coming from the front. And this time, Ethan knew exactly who was sitting there.